Hey everyone, welcome to Top 10 of Kila, where we dig up the craziest, wildest, and most unbelievable stories from history, the kind you won't find in your schoolbooks. Today, we're counting down the top 10 most ridiculous historical events that actually happened. Trust me, some of these are so strange, you'll wonder if someone was just messing with us. Before we jump in, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the weirdness coming your way. And hey, if you think you know a crazier story, drop it in the comments. Let's see who's got the wildest history facts. Alright, buckle up, history's about to get really weird. 10. The Great Emu War, Australia, 1932. In the heart of the Great Depression, when the world seemed to be collapsing under the weight of economic despair, Australia faced a peculiar and almost laughable crisis, a war against emus. Now, emus aren't your typical battlefield enemies. They are large, flightless birds native to Australia, standing nearly 6 feet tall, looking more like prehistoric creatures than something you'd expect to fight. But in 1932, these birds were causing serious problems. After their breeding season, thousands of emus migrated inland, straight into Western Australian wheat farms. They trampled fences, gobbled up precious crops, and basically acted like the unwanted guests who not only crash your party but trash your house. The Australian government's response: send the army. Yes, armed soldiers with machine guns were dispatched to solve the emu problem. One might expect an easy victory for the humans, but the emus had other plans. Despite their awkward appearance, these birds moved swiftly, scattered into smaller groups, and proved surprisingly difficult targets. The soldiers wasted ammunition trying to shoot them, but the emus simply ran, hid, and continued their feast. In the end, after weeks of this odd conflict, the military conceded defeat. The Great Emu War officially ended with the emus victorious and the farmers still struggling with crop damage. Philosophically, this episode is a stunning example of human arrogance crashing headlong into nature's stubbornness. Humans like to think of themselves as rulers of the earth, masters of technology and strategy, yet here we see a simple, natural creature outsmarting and outlasting an army. It's almost poetic. The emus, oblivious to human plans, reminding us that control is an illusion. There's also a delicious irony here. While nations fight deadly wars over ideology and power, the Australian government lost a war against birds. It's a cheeky reminder that sometimes the simplest parts of the natural world refuse to bend to human will, and maybe that's how it should be. 9. The Dancing Plague, Europe, 1518. In the summer of 1518, the city of Strasbourg was gripped by a bizarre and terrifying event now known as the Dancing Plague. It started with one woman, Frau Trafi, who stepped into the street and began dancing uncontrollably. At first, it seemed like a curious oddity, but within days dozens more joined her, and soon hundreds of people were dancing in the streets with no music, no reason, and no control. This wasn't joyous celebration, it was a frantic, relentless movement. The dancers twirled, jumped, and shuffled for days and weeks, some until they collapsed from sheer exhaustion or died from strokes and heart attacks. Historians and scientists have struggled to explain what caused this strange mass hysteria. Some say it was a case of ergot poisoning, caused by a fungus growing on rye bread, which can induce hallucinations and muscle spasms. Others believe it was a psychological response to the harsh conditions of the time: famine, disease, and extreme stress. There's also a spiritual angle. In deeply religious times, some thought it was divine punishment or possession. The local authorities' response was, in hindsight, tragically absurd. They hired musicians to encourage more dancing, hoping to dance the madness out. As you can guess, that only made things worse. This event offers a fascinating, if unsettling, window into the human mind and society. When people face unbearable suffering, their mental defenses can break in strange ways. The Dancing Plague is a dance on the edge between reason and madness, a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life lurks a fragile thread holding our sanity together. It also highlights how societies can misunderstand and mishandle crises, sometimes worsening the damage. On a sarcastic note, it's almost as if the authorities thought, if you can't cure it, just make it worse with more noise and chaos. The Dancing Plague teaches us how thin the line is between order and chaos, and that sometimes, the world's most mysterious problems have no neat solution. 8. The Cadaver Synod, Rome, 897 AD. If you thought history's courtroom dramas were wild, wait till you hear about the Cadaver Synod. Imagine putting a dead man on trial. That's exactly what Pope Stephen VI did when he had the corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, exhumed, dressed in papal robes, and propped up on a throne in a courtroom. This wasn't some Gothic horror story, it was real, happening in Rome in 897 AD. The corpse was defended by a church official who answered for the deceased pope, but the trial was more about politics than justice. Formosus was accused of perjury and other crimes during his papacy, but the trial was clearly motivated by bitter power struggles within the church. Finding a corpse guilty might seem absurd, but in the fierce world of medieval church politics, symbolism mattered more than logic. After the trial, the dead pope's body was stripped of its robes, thrown into the Tiber River, and reportedly mutilated. This grotesque event reveals the dark side of human nature when combined with power and vengeance. It's almost laughable if it weren't so tragic, a reminder that sometimes people's desire for revenge makes them lose all sense of decency. The Cadaver synod is a morbid metaphor for how politics can corrupt everything, even death itself. It also shows how history is full of moments where reality is stranger and more absurd than fiction, and how people can go to terrible lengths to settle scores, even if it means dragging the dead into the fight. 7. The Defenestrations of Prague. History is full of strange ways people solve their problems, but few are as literally dramatic as the Defenestrations of Prague. The word, defenestration, simply means throwing someone out of a window. But in Prague, it became a serious political tool. Over the centuries, multiple important conflicts were solved by tossing enemies out of high windows, a very direct form of saying, "You're not welcome here anymore." The most famous defenestration happened in 1618, when Protestant nobles threw Catholic officials out of the windows of Prague Castle. Miraculously, most survived the fall, landing in a pile of manure or soft ground. Talk about saving grace. This event didn't just stop there, it sparked the 30 Years' War, one of the deadliest wars in European history. The act itself might seem barbaric or absurd, but it reveals something deeply human. When words fail, sometimes violence becomes the language of politics. It's the kind of problem solving that makes you wonder if people ever really learned better. Instead of debates or diplomacy, they resorted to a literal, out the window, approach, an unambiguous final answer. Philosophically, this tells us about the thin veneer of civilization. Beneath polite speeches and treaties lies a primal instinct to protect power and territory by any means necessary. And if that means shoving someone out a window, so be it. There's also a dark humor in the fact that something so violent became a symbol of political change. The defenestrations remind us that history's biggest upheavals often start with small but violent actions, and sometimes a well-timed shove. 6. Operation Paul Bunyan. The Axe murder incident, 1976. The Cold War was full of strange, tense moments, but few are as oddly specific as Operation Paul Bunyan. The story starts with a poplar tree. In the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, a border so tense it's sometimes called the most dangerous place on Earth, 2 American soldiers were trimming a tree that was blocking the view between US and North Korean forces. Suddenly, North Korean soldiers attacked, killing the 2 Americans. In response, the United States and South Korea launched Operation Paul Bunyan, a huge military operation designed just to finish cutting down that one tree. The show of force was massive. Dozens of heavily armed soldiers, backed by tanks, helicopters, and fighter jets, marched into the DMZ to chop down a single poplar. The message was clear: no more attacks, and no more trees blocking views. It sounds ridiculous sending an army to cut down a tree, but it highlights the absurd tensions of the Cold War. A single tree became a symbol of power, control, and brinkmanship. One wrong move and the world might have spiraled into a much bigger conflict. This story reminds us how easily small events can become dangerous in a world full of suspicion and fear. It's almost comical to think the fate of nations could hinge on a tree. But there's also a serious lesson here. Sometimes, political struggles aren't about big ideas or noble causes, but about controlling the little things that others might use against you. In the end, Operation Paul Bunyan is a reminder that war isn't always fought on battlefields. Sometimes, it's fought in the shadows of trees. 5. The Great Molasses Flood, Boston, 1919. On a cold January day in 1919, Boston experienced a disaster so sticky and strange that it sounds like a bad joke. A giant tank holding over 2 million gallons of molasses suddenly burst, releasing a wave of thick, sticky syrup rushing through the streets at around 35 miles per hour. Imagine a tsunami, but instead of water, it was made of gooey, sweet molasses. The wave destroyed buildings, overturned cars, and tragically killed 21 people while injuring over 150. People were trapped in the sticky mess, struggling to escape while the syrup coated everything in sight. For weeks, the area smelled of molasses, especially on hot days, and some locals say the sweet smell lingers even now. At first glance, it's easy to laugh, how could molasses cause such chaos? But the disaster exposed serious problems. The tank was poorly maintained and constructed cheaply to save money. The companies responsible ignored warnings, putting profit ahead of safety. The tragedy led to new laws and regulations about building standards and corporate responsibility. There's a bitter irony here. Something as sweet and harmless as molasses became a deadly flood. It's a reminder that even the most innocent things can cause destruction when human greed and carelessness get involved. The Great Molasses Flood is a sticky metaphor for how small mistakes, ignored warnings, and greed can pile up into disasters that ruin lives and communities. 4. The Phony War. Early World War II, 1939-1940, when World War II was declared in September 1939, most expected battles to erupt immediately. After all, war meant fighting, right? But for nearly 8 months, on the Western Front, an eerie silence took hold. Britain and France declared war on Germany but didn't attack. Soldiers dug trenches and prepared for battle, but the enemy lines barely moved. This strange calm earned the nickname the Phony War, a war that was more about waiting than fighting. Imagine the psychological toll. Soldiers locked in trenches, tense and ready, knowing something big was coming but forced to wait in anxious silence. Civilians were terrified and confused, hearing of war but seeing no action. For some, it felt like the calm before a storm that might never arrive. For others, it was a cruel joke of fate. The Phony War teaches us that war is more than bombs and bullets. Sometimes, it's about fear, hesitation, and the long waiting game that wears down minds and spirits. It's a reminder that in conflicts, the psychological battle can be as deadly as any bullet. And when months pass with nothing happening, the uncertainty itself becomes a weapon. On a slightly sarcastic note, it's as if the generals were saying, "We're at war, but let's just sit tight and see what happens." The Phony War shows us that not all wars roar with noise, some whisper with tension and dread. 3. The Tanganyika Laughter Epidemic. 1962. In 1962, something almost unbelievable happened in a small region of Tanganyika, now Tanzania, a laughter epidemic. It started in a girls' boarding school, where a few students began laughing uncontrollably. But this was no fun or happy laughter. It was a strange, unstoppable fit that quickly spread to hundreds of people in nearby villages. The laughter attacks lasted from a few minutes to several hours, sometimes days, making it impossible for people to work, attend school, or live normal lives. The epidemic spread so widely that entire schools and villages had to close for weeks or months. Doctors were baffled and couldn't find any physical cause, eventually concluding it was a case of mass hysteria, a psychological illness caused by extreme stress and fear. This strange outbreak reveals the powerful link between mind and body and how emotions can spread through communities like wildfire. Laughter, usually a sign of happiness, became a symbol of collective anxiety and distress. It's a reminder that human beings are deeply connected, and when one person's mind struggles, it can ripple out and affect others in mysterious ways. On a more philosophical note, the laughter epidemic shows how stress and fear can manifest in the most unexpected ways, sometimes turning joy into an uncontrollable curse. It's almost like nature's way of telling us, you can't ignore the pressure building inside. And on a slightly sarcastic level, it's ironic that something as joyful as laughter became a source of disruption and suffering. Sometimes, life really does have a twisted sense of humor. 2. The Affair of the Poisons, France, 17th century. In the glittering courts of 17th century France, during the reign of King Louis XIV, a dark and deadly scandal unfolded known as the Affair of the Poisons. Beneath the elegance and grandeur, nobles and fortune-tellers were secretly plotting murder, poisoning rivals, and practicing witchcraft to gain power and influence. The scandal erupted when several aristocrats were caught conspiring to kill or poison members of the royal court. Accusations flew wildly, involving secret societies, black magic, and hidden poisoners lurking in the shadows. The affair led to a wave of arrests, executions, and deep paranoia that gripped the French elite. No one was safe from suspicion, and fear of betrayal spread like wildfire. This event exposes the darker side of human ambition and the corrupting power of greed and fear. It's a story of how people can lose their humanity in the pursuit of power, willing to trust poisons and spells rather than honesty and kindness. The affair of the poisons reminds us that sometimes, history isn't about heroes and villains, it's about the messy, ugly truths beneath the surface. There's a bitter irony here. In the court of the Sun King, where everything was supposed to shine bright and perfect, darkness and suspicion festered. It's a reminder that beneath even the most beautiful facades lie secrets, and that fear often drives people to the worst extremes. In a sarcastic tone, one might say, ah yes, the royal court where friendship means checking your drink twice and every smile might hide a dagger. 1. The Radium Girls. Early 20th century. At the dawn of the 20th century, a terrible story unfolded that exposed the dark side of industrial progress, the tale of the Radium Girls. These were young women employed to paint watch dials with a glowing radium paint, a job that seemed harmless and even glamorous at first. They were told the paint was safe and encouraged to lick their brushes to keep the tips sharp. What these women didn't know was that radium is highly radioactive and deadly. Over time, many suffered horrific health problems. Their bones deteriorated, jaws literally fell apart, and some died in great pain. When the women bravely took legal action against their employers, they faced powerful companies who tried to cover up the truth. The Radium Girls' fight helped change labor laws and workplace safety standards across the country. Their story is both tragic and inspiring, a reminder of the human cost behind so-called progress, and how courage and persistence can force society to confront uncomfortable truths. Philosophically, their tale warns us of the dangers of blind trust in technology and authority. Sometimes, the desire for profit blinds industries to human suffering, and it takes the bravery of ordinary people to demand justice. And with a touch of sarcasm, it's a stark reminder that, glowing in the dark, isn't always a superpower, sometimes, it's a slow poison. The Radium Girls' legacy lives on as a beacon for workers' rights and the fight against corporate greed. Wow, what a ride! From dancing epidemics to wars against giant birds, history sure knows how to keep us entertained and humble. If you enjoyed this trip through the strangest moments in time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more jaw-dropping stories right here on Top 10 of Kila. Got a favorite story from today's video? Or maybe you know an even crazier one? Share it in the comments. I love hearing from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll uncover even more unbelievable facts. Stay curious, and keep questioning the past.